Welcome to World History Unveiled. In this issue, we will be taking a detailed look at Russia's magnificent history, from ancient times to the present day. Russia is a vast country with a diverse ethnic population, and its history is extremely complex. Here, we will unravel that complexity and convey it in an easy-to-understand manner. Please stay with us until the end. Chapter 1: Ancient Russia and the Establishment of the Principality of Kiev. Around the 1st century BC, the present-day Russian region was inhabited by Slavic peoples. These people are also the ancestors of present-day Ukraine and Belarus. The Slavic peoples lived a quiet life in the vast forested areas and steppes of Eastern Europe, but they also had contact with other peoples. In the 4th century, the Germanic peoples began their Great Migration, which affected the Slavic peoples as well. They were forced to migrate and expand their residential areas. Eventually, they were divided into several tribes, each forming its own culture and social structure. In the 9th century, a man named Rurik unified the Slavic tribes around Novgorod and established a powerful ruling system. After Rurik's death, a man named Oleg rose to power and moved southward to occupy Kiev. This was the beginning of the Principality of Kiev. The Principality of Kiev, with its small Slavic states, established diplomatic relations with the Eastern Roman Empire and the Eastern Frankish Kingdom. The rulers of the Principality of Kiev collected taxes and increased the power of the state. During this period, Kiev became the center of the Russian region. In the late 10th century, Vladimir I became ruler of the Principality of Kiev and strengthened relations with the Eastern Roman Empire. Vladimir I formed a political alliance with the Eastern Roman emperors by marrying off his sister to one of them. This alliance brought Christianity from the Eastern Roman Empire to the Principality of Kiev and Christianized the entire principality. Influenced by the Eastern Roman Empire, the Principality of Kiev adopted Greek Orthodoxy and established itself as a religious entity of its own. Under the reign of Vladimir I, the Principality of Kiev became increasingly developed and became the central state of the Slavic peoples. However, subsequent rulers found it difficult to maintain the power of the principality due to internal conflicts and external pressures. The prosperity of the Principality of Kiev was temporary, and its decline would soon come. Chapter 2: The Decline of the Principality of Kiev and the Mongol Invasion. At the end of the 11th century, the Principality of Kiev gradually declined due to internal strife. Disputes over territory and rivalries among rulers severely reduced the power of the state. During the reign of Prince Yaroslav the Wise, the Kiev Principality briefly flourished again, but after his death, the principality was divided. The rulers of the Kievan Principality were locked in a succession struggle, which resulted in the loss of national cohesion. In the 13th century, the Mongol Empire, unified by Genghis Khan, expanded its power and advanced toward Europe. In 1237, Mongol troops invaded the Russian region and occupied the cities of the Principality of Kiev one after another. The Principality of Kiev was helplessly defeated by the overwhelming military power of the Mongols, and was placed under their control. Mongol rule was so severe that the Kievan Principality was subjected to a heavy tax burden known as the Tatar yoke. Under Mongol rule, the Principality of Kiev virtually collapsed, and many small Slavic states were forced to become independent. After the decline of the Principality of Kiev, the Grand Duchy of Vladimir emerged as the new ruler of the Russian region. During this period, a man named Alexander Nevsky strongly ruled the Principality of Novgorod and became the Grand Duke of Vladimir. Nevsky fought and defeated the Swedish and German knights against invasions from the west. For these victories, Nevsky was hailed as a hero of Russia. After Nevsky's death, however, the Grand Duchy of Vladimir also fell and the Principality of Moscow emerged as the new ruler of Russia. The Duchy of Moscow took advantage of the decline of the Grand Duchy of Vladimir and won the battle for Vladimir's Grand Dukedom in 1318. With this victory, the Duchy of Moscow took control of the Russian region and further expanded its power. Chapter 3: The Rise of the Grand Duchy of Moscow and its Independence. After the Grand Duchy of Moscow took over the rule of Vladimir the Great, it gradually became more powerful. Unlike other Slavic duchies, the Principality of Moscow found a way to survive skillfully under Mongol rule. While ostensibly recognizing Mongol suzerainty, the rulers of the Principality of Moscow internally sought a path to independence. Ivan III, who ascended to the throne in 1462, undertook a massive territorial expansion to develop the Principality of Moscow into the central state of Russia. Ivan III first annexed the surrounding Slavic duchies in an effort to gain independence from the Mongols. He also established the Moscow Principality as the Third Rome by marrying an Eastern Roman princess. This marriage made the Principality of Moscow the self-appointed heir to the Eastern Roman Empire and the patron of the Orthodox Church. Ivan III was also victorious in the war against the Mongols, completely defeating Mongol suzerainty. This victory effectively freed Russia from Mongol rule and established its status as an independent state. Ivan III, calling himself Tsar, established his authority as monarch of Russia. Under his rule, the Principality of Moscow grew into a powerful state that ruled all of Russia. The Duchy of Moscow continued to expand its territory and further elevate Russia's position in the world. Ivan III's successors also continued his policies and elevated Russia to the status of a great power. Thus, the Principality of Moscow began its path to the Russian Empire and its historical role. At the same time, however, Russia's future was faced with new challenges as it continued to struggle against internal and external adversaries. Chapter 4: Ivan IV and Russia's Period of Change. At the turn of the 16th century, Ivan IV became the ruler of the Grand Duchy of Moscow and ruled powerfully. He was a powerful monarch known as the Thunder Emperor. To consolidate his power, Ivan IV instituted numerous reforms and centralized Russia. He sought to curb the power of the nobility and feudal lords and to consolidate control over the power of the state. Ivan IV also actively expanded Russia's territory in order to position it as a powerful state. He conquered the Kazan Khanate and the Astrakhan Khanate and expanded Russia's territory to the southeast. However, his forceful policies and harsh governing methods resulted in the creation of many enemies both at home and abroad. Ivan IV purged one by one the nobles and bureaucrats who rebelled against him, and his reign of terror spread unrest throughout the country. The period of tyrannical rule known as the Opportunina in particular resulted in the execution of many nobles and had a serious impact on Russian society. Although Ivan IV's policies temporarily strengthened Russian rule, his death plunged the country into chaos. Ivan IV's successors were not as strong leaders as he was and were unable to maintain the unity of the state. After his death, Russia was hit by famine and peasant revolts, and the state was weakened. Russia also faced invasions from outside, and its land was gradually lost. The country became increasingly divided, with lords from various regions claiming independence. As a result, Russia plunged into a period of turmoil and loss of national unity. In the midst of this turmoil, the Romanov dynasty was established in 1613, ushering in a new era. Chapter 5: The Romanov Dynasty and the Expansion of the Russian Empire. The Romanov dynasty began with the election of Mikhail Romanov as the first Tsar in 1613. This brought Russia back to stability. Mikhail Romanov brought the country out of its turmoil, centralized power, and restored Russia as a powerful nation once again. In the early years of the Romanov dynasty, the peasantry's status was defined by a code of laws, which established a system of concentration. This forced the peasants to be subordinate to their lords, and Russian society shifted to an economic system based on the concentration system. However, dissatisfaction with the concentration system grew, and large-scale peasant uprisings such as the Stenka-Razin rebellion occurred in the 17th century. These rebellions were suppressed by the government, but instability remained in Russian society. In the 18th century, Russia under the reign of Peter I undertook major reforms and westernization. Peter I introduced Western European technology and institutions to transform Russia into a modern state. He also defeated Sweden in the Northern War and made inroads into the Baltic Sea. This made Russia one of the great powers of Europe. After the death of Peter I, Russia was temporarily in turmoil, but regained power when Ekaterina II ascended to the throne. She took the Crimean Peninsula from the Ottoman Empire and secured access to the Black Sea. She also cooperated with Prussia and Austria to partition Poland, greatly expanding Russia's territory. Under the reign of Yekaterina II, Russia became a central player in European politics and increased its influence. The Russian Empire developed into a multi-ethnic nation with vast territory, and Russian nationalism emerged. In the 19th century, however, Russia faced internal contradictions and external pressures, and new challenges emerged. Chapter 6: Socialist Movements and the Rise of Revolution. In the late 19th century, the Industrial Revolution was underway in Russia late in the century, and the working class grew. However, working conditions were harsh and wages were low, leading to growing discontent among the workers. Meanwhile, the socialist ideas of Karl Marx reached Russia, and the socialist movement began to spread. A revolutionary named Vladimir Lenin appeared on the scene, and under his leadership the socialist movement rapidly expanded its power. Lenin proposed his own revolutionary theory of the dictatorship of the proletariat, which attracted many supporters. In 1904, Russia lost the Russo-Japanese War, and domestic discontent rose dramatically as a result. In 1905, the Bloody Sunday incident occurred, and protests against the government spread throughout the country. This incident was a sign of revolution in Russian society. In response to this movement, the Tsar's government announced the establishment of a parliament, and elections were held for the first time for members of parliament. However, the elections were not fair, and the government continued to rule with heavy-handedness, leading to unresolved discontent among workers and peasants. The workers and peasants began to voice their rebellion against the Tsarist regime, and the momentum for revolution grew. When World War I broke out, Russia suffered heavy casualties in its battles with Germany and Austria, further increasing public discontent. In February 1917, a demonstration for bread in Petrograd triggered the February Revolution. Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate, and the Russian Empire came to an end. The Romanov dynasty came to an end. A provisional government was established, but the Soviets emerged as a powerful force, and Russia entered an era of dual power. Lenin insisted that the Soviets should seize all power and led the October Revolution to overthrow the provisional government. Thus, Russia entered a new era under a socialist regime, but the road was not smooth. Chapter 7: The Russian Revolution and the Formation of the Soviet Union. With the October Revolution of 1917, the Bolsheviks under Lenin overthrew the provisional government and established the Soviet regime. This marked the beginning of Russia's path to becoming a socialist state. Lenin implemented a series of reforms, such as expanding the rights of the working class and nationalizing land and factories. However, the new government had to confront many counter-revolutionary forces both at home and abroad. Civil war with counter-revolutionary forces, known as the White Army, erupted, plunging Russia into chaos. The Civil War, which lasted until 1920, finally ended with the victory of the Red Army Bolsheviks, but Russian society was exhausted and suffered many casualties. In 1922, Lenin established the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics USSR, and the four republics of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Zakavkaz formed the Union. The USSR emerged on the international scene as the world's first socialist state, and its existence was a cause of deepening conflict with the capitalist states. Lenin introduced the new economic policy NEP in 1921 in an effort to rebuild the state and restore the economy. This restored a partial market economy. However, when Lenin died in 1924, a succession struggle erupted within the Soviet leadership. As a result, Stalin took the position of supreme leader. Stalin ruled autocratically, introduced a planned economy, and promoted rapid industrialization, but he suffered many casualties in the process. In the 1930s, a mass purge known as the Great Purge took place, and those who opposed Stalin were purged one after another. Under Stalin's rule, the Soviet Union grew into a powerful military state, and its military buildup in preparation for World War II was promoted. In 1939, the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact with Germany which included cooperation in the partition of Poland. However, this treaty was annulled when Germany invaded the Soviet Union. In 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union and the Russo-German War began. The Soviet Union suffered heavy casualties, but defeated the Germans at the Battle of Stalingrad. With the end of World War II, the Soviet Union occupied Eastern Europe and established communist regimes in Eastern Europe. Thus, the Soviet Union demonstrated its power to the world as the victorious nation, opening a new era of the Cold War. Chapter 8: The Cold War and the Collapse of the Soviet Union. After World War II, the Cold War began, centered on the Soviet Union and the United States. The two countries were bitterly opposed to each other on military, economic, and political fronts. The Soviet Union established communist regimes in Eastern European countries and grouped these countries together as the Eastern Powers. The United States, on the other hand, supported the reconstruction of Western Europe through the Marshall Plan, forming the Western Powers. The Cold War deepened the conflict between the two countries in various ways, including a race to develop nuclear weapons and a space race. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis erupted and tensions rose to the brink of nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States, but were eventually resolved peacefully. Thereafter, the Soviet Union stagnated economically, and the Brezhnev administration continued amid growing domestic discontent, but no reforms of note were implemented. In the 1980s, the Soviet economy continued to deteriorate and the political system became increasingly rigid. In response, Gorbachev took over as the new leader. In order to promote reforms, Gorbachev introduced a new policy of perestroika restructuring and glasnost openness of information. This led to a certain degree of liberalization within the Soviet Union, but at the same time, democratic movements gained momentum in Eastern European countries, and communist regimes collapsed one after another. In 1989, the Berlin Wall collapsed, reunifying East and West Germany. This effectively ended the Cold War. Within the Soviet Union, there was a growing movement for independence, and the Baltic republics and other republics declared their independence one after another. In 1991, the Soviet Union was officially dissolved and the republics took a new path as independent states. Gorbachev resigned and was replaced by Yeltsin as the first president of the Russian Federation. The Soviet Union as a nation came to an end. Under Yeltsin's administration, Russia made the transition to a market economy, but the rapid economic reforms caused social turmoil and impoverished the people. Russia thus entered a new era, but the road was not smooth, and the Putin administration later began its authoritarian rule. Chapter 9: Dissolution of the Soviet Union and Birth of the Russian Federation. In 1991, the Soviet Union was officially dissolved and the Russian Federation was born. This event is one of the greatest turning points in world politics in the second half of the 20th century. Boris Yeltsin, the first president of the Russian Federation, promoted economic liberalization and the transition to a market economy. Under Yeltsin's administration, state-owned enterprises were privatized and the inflow of foreign capital was encouraged. However, this rapid economic reform had serious social consequences. Economic liberalization led to a rapid widening of the gap between rich and poor in Russia and a sharp increase in unemployment. Many citizens suffered from the hardships of life, and social unrest spread. The Yeltsin administration also took a hard-line stance against the oligarch conglomerates, a privileged class in the former Soviet era, and confrontations with them intensified. In the late 1990s, the Russian economy defaulted and lost international credibility. This led to a decline in support for the Yeltsin administration. In 1999, Yeltsin resigned as president, citing health problems, and named Vladimir Putin as his successor. Putin became president of the Russian Federation in 2000 and has been a strong leader of Russian politics ever since. Putin's regime ruled with a strong hand, purging oligarchs and giving preferential treatment to companies that pledged allegiance to the government. In addition, Putin adopted a policy of centralization, limiting regional autonomy and unifying the nation. This has stabilized the political system in Russia, but at the same time, democracy has receded. In 2008, Putin stepped down from the presidency and Dmitry Medvedev assumed the presidency, but Putin continued to influence the government as prime minister. In 2012, Putin was again elected president and once again ruled strongly. Under his administration, Russia increased its influence at home and abroad. In 2014, Putin's government responded to the crisis in Ukraine by annexing Crimea. This action was controversial in the international community, and sanctions against Russia were tightened. In 2020, Putin implemented constitutional reforms and extended his presidential term. This allowed him to remain president until 2036. In 2022, Putin's regime launched a military invasion of Ukraine, and to this day, heavy fighting continues between Russia and Ukraine. Chapter 10: Modern Russia and the Putin Regime. The Putin administration has implemented a variety of policies, both domestically and internationally, to rein Russia back into the world as a stable and powerful country. His policies have promoted strong governance as well as economic growth. Putin won the support of the people and was re-elected. However, there were many challenges to his administration. In particular, democracy within Russia has regressed and repression against political opponents has intensified. Regulations on the media and the internet were tightened, limiting freedom of speech. This has reduced the transparency of information in Russian society. The Putin administration, while emphasizing economic growth, became increasingly at odds with the international community. In particular, relations with the West have cooled. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 resulted in a deep rift between Russia and the West. This has deepened Russia's international isolation, and economic sanctions have had a negative impact on the domestic economy. Putin has maintained domestic support, arguing that a strong leader is necessary to protect Russia's sovereignty and independence, but he continues to be criticized by the international community. Modern Russia maintains stability under a strong political system, but domestic and international conflicts persist. A particular challenge is its economic structure, which relies heavily on oil and gas exports and is heavily influenced by fluctuations in international markets. The Putin administration has deployed a variety of strategies to maintain its international influence while suppressing domestic discontent. Under his leadership, Russia is once again emerging as a major power, but its future remains uncertain. The course of the Putin administration will have a major impact not only on Russian but also on global politics and economics. The war between Russia and Ukraine is still ongoing, and many challenges lie ahead for Russia's future. The world is watching to see what path Russia will take in the future. In this video, we have detailed the history of Russia from ancient times to the present day. The history of this vast country occupies a very important place in world history. We hope that you too have become interested in the history of Russia through this video. We will continue to explain the history of various countries and regions, so please subscribe to our channel and give us a high rating. See you in the next video.